Hi there, I'm Coach Kenneth,
And I'm Coach Victoria.
and in this video, we're going to be talking to you about when your breakup triggers your traumas.
And this may happen more often than you think.
Yeah, breakups themselves, I think, can be very traumatic for so many of us. But for those of us that grew up in a home that there was abandonment issues or things going on with your parents, family stuff, it can be extremely triggering, and you can wonder why a breakup, maybe even a short-term breakup, can feel devastating. That you've dated somebody only for 3 months and it feels like the end of your world.
Oh, yeah. And sometimes it's even only after a date. This intense loss, and you feel this immense amount of grief. And so you're thinking to yourself, is this normal after a breakup? Is this prolonged? What's going on here? And is this bringing up something more than what the breakup actually is? And so we figured we would talk about this today because breakups are hard to begin with, period. Breakups are hard enough on their own. But as Craig was saying, when we do have trauma in our history, when we do have difficult experiences with our caregivers, with our key attachment figures, a breakup can almost unearth or bring all of these things back up. So we're going to talk about how a current breakup can be almost like this secret skeleton key into your past and kind of unlock those unhealed wounds from the past.
Yeah, there's so much that goes on in our unconscious that we don't remember, we don't really think about. Because I remember even when I was just starting as a therapist saying to Margaret, like, I don't understand. How can something that happened at 5 years old have such a huge impact when you're in your 30s? And it didn't quite add up for me for a while, but Margaret and I would talk about it every week, all the time. And finally, I started to really understand and see it. And it made a lot more sense in why people are so devastated after a breakup.
Oh, yeah. And these are critical times for development in your brain, especially during early childhood, but throughout your childhood and even your adolescent years, you're developing personality, you're developing your boundary setting, you're learning about yourself, you're building your sense of self and your identity. So these are really critical periods of life. And so relationships are also really critical parts of life. And so when a relationship dissolves or ends or you end up in a separation, this can really affect you to your core. And what's strange is even if a breakup was amicable, sometimes you can be left feeling with this like pit in your chest. You're thinking, well, we're amicable, we're on good terms, nothing really catastrophic happened in the breakup itself, besides the breakup itself. Why am I feeling this intensity? And sometimes you will start thinking more and more about your childhood, and you might have different memories resurface during a breakup, which can be really strange. Suddenly you're thinking about, when you were younger, or different times when you had been abandoned, or it's a familiar feeling, like an eerily familiar feeling that creeps back up, and you're like, man, I haven't felt this in a long time. I remember feeling this as a child. Why am I feeling it now as an adult? So it can be very, very strange.
Yeah, you guys have heard me talk about like growing up with my family and that my parents split up when I was like a year and a half old. And when I was going to my dad's house on the weekends, I felt horrible. I felt awful inside. I was sad all the time. I was crying all the time. Especially like in the summertime when I'd have to go for like maybe like a month or two or whatever it was. I don't even know. But it felt like forever. And all I did was want to go back home. And it totally made sense when I started to understand, like, no wonder why I was feeling like that in my breakups. That's how I felt when I was little, when I was, 3 years old or 4 years old. Those same feelings were there. And I think it's like maybe we create these pathways in our brain. And so because I had that trauma there, it's like the same pathways are being activated when I'm going through that breakup.
It's really strange. I'm going to quote Margaret here, but she would always talk about grief and describe it almost like paper clips. I don't know if you've ever had those like paper clip holders. You can never grab just one. They would always like hook onto each other.
Yeah.
So you'd like try and there'd be this whole string of paper clips. And that's how she would describe grief, is that when you're going through a loss, a lot of times it brings back up a lot of old losses. Same with abandonment. When you're feeling that sense of abandonment with your romantic partner in adulthood, it's almost bringing back up that abandonment from childhood, that familiar feeling. And so it might not make sense when you're feeling it in the moment, but the more you do think about it and the more you understand how trauma impacts you over a lifespan, then the more you understand what's happening. And grief is layered, right?
Yeah.
Grief is really layered. So it can be difficult to separate what's happening now from what happened then. We on the channel talk a lot about attachment theory. We talk a lot about childhood dynamics and family dynamics. And we see when these things come up during a breakup as an opportunity. This is coming back up for you to face. This is coming back up in a way to where it's more difficult to avoid it now. And you can see it more clearly the more you understand the ties between what's happening now, how you're reacting and responding now, and what's happened as a child.
That's why you have to put words to it. That's why you want to get into therapy and talk to a therapist about it. That's why we did the workbooks and the course. All of that is putting words to it. And that's very healing, because now you're taking it from your unconscious and making it conscious again. You're thinking about it. You're actively thinking about things. And like with the course and the workbooks, you're thinking about difficult questions about what happened in the relationship, what you can do differently, what you could do better, how you're going to turn things around when your ex comes back. And there's very specific questions that gets your brain to really think about specific things and gives you a plan, as opposed to your mind going through this endless loop of constantly just missing them, but not being able to nail it down and identify those specific things.
Yeah. And the difference between what's happening now versus what may have happened to you as a child or growing up, there's many differences, but the big one is that you're no longer a helpless child. Now you're an adult with some more agency. So that's really why we see it as an opportunity. There are tools out there, resources to help you learn how to self-soothe. I really am of the camp of working through a breakup is really working on your overall mental health. If you're able to learn how to self-soothe during probably one of the more difficult times in your adult life, like separating from a romantic relationship, some of you are going through divorces, massive life changes. If you're able to work through those and learn how to self-soothe during those really, really stressful times, which you're not always going to have it right, but we try. I really do think that's working on your overall mental health and your resiliency.
Absolutely. And that all that stuff pays off regardless of what happens with your ex. And that's what I love so much about what we teach here, is that when you work through all these things, your ex will notice the difference. And if they don't come back, the difference that you have and the changes that you make and the growth that you have, it pays off. You're a lot more likely to soothe yourself, have emotional self-control, understand what people need in relationships, show up as a better partner.
And one thing
areas.
Yeah, so many. And one thing that I love is hearing from clients, sometimes even on calls, you all will say like, oh, I realize that I'm an avoidant attachment, or I realize that I have more of an anxious attachment. And this is a little bit about my childhood and what happened. So I can see you all really listening, really understanding and connecting the pieces for yourselves. So that's really cool to see that kind of introspection.
Yeah, we love to see you have that growth and those growth stories we hear about all the time. And we want to know about your success stories.
That too.
Right?
That too.
I had another person yesterday get their ex back, right? What happened? They didn't do the work. They did a call with me 7 years ago.
Wow.
They didn't do the work. They got that ex back. They broke up again because they didn't do the work. Then they started dating somebody else. 4+ year relationship, like maybe 4.5 years relationship, because he didn't do that work. Now he's going through another breakup.
Wow.
And after the call, he got the course. He's like, no, I know I have to do the work this time. Because he realized those patterns he was doing over and over again. So there's so much great opportunity that will happen for you after your breakup if you try and stay positive and focus on how this can change your life. You can't control your ex and what they do. Now, you can have a plan and make sure that you minimize those mistakes and improve the chances to reattract them. But ultimately, you're going to have to live with yourself for the rest of your life. So the more you're emotionally stable and you feel good and you're knowledgeable about healthy relationships, the more likely you're going to reattract your ex or find new people that are blown away by how you stand out in the dating pool.
Yeah. And I would also say Many of you watching might be thinking more about your childhood and realizing that you have experienced traumatic events that have impacted you. And if that is the case, we do always recommend finding a local therapist that does specialize or work with trauma. So that is something that we recommend and want to put out there, because we know that, if you've had difficult experiences growing up, a lot of times it does show up in our romantic partnerships. So breakups can be an opportunity to deal with it. It can be an opportunity for it to come up to the surface and say, hello, my old friend.
And this
trauma.
And this will probably be the most motivated you ever are to grow.
That too.
All right. Hopefully this one's been helpful to you. If you'd like to get our help personally, you can do that on my website, askcraig.net. I do email coaching and I do Zoom calls. Coach Victoria is also available for Zoom calls.
I'm here whenever you'd like to chat.
Just click on her name on the top of the website to schedule with her. But that's it for this video. I'm Coach Craig Kenneth.
And I'm Coach Victoria.
And we will talk with you soon.